The first light of dawn should have brought calm to Burkina Faso. Instead, it was shattered by explosions that tore through the silence, echoing across the eastern corridor of the country. In just minutes, more than 50 of Burkina Faso's most disciplined soldiers were gone, struck down in a brutal and suspicious military attack. Radios were jammed. Surveillance drones went dark. By the time reinforcements arrived, it was too late. And this happened only days after President Ibrahim Traoré rejected an invitation from Washington to accept a prestigious achievement award. To many, it sounded like an honor. To him, it smelled like a political trap wrapped in polite applause. He turned it down without hesitation and even refused to meet envoys from a major US-backed organization. Days later, his soldiers were dead. For much of the Burkinabè public, the connection is too obvious to ignore. But here is where the story changes. Traoré did not respond with long speeches or empty threats. He answered with action. Quietly, an abandoned repair facility in Ouagadougou roared back to life, not to fix old machines, but to build weapons of the future. Burkinabè-made drone missiles, designed and assembled by young engineers determined never to see their homeland caught off guard again. This is no longer a silent revolution. It has become an open war for dignity, one that stretches beyond Burkina Faso's borders into the heart of Africa's ongoing fight for sovereignty. So the question is, will this bold new doctrine of self-reliance protect Burkina Faso from the storms ahead, or will it invite even greater challenges from the world's most powerful forces? If you believe Africa must never bow again, share this story. And if you stand for truth over headlines, subscribe, because what you're about to hear is a story the world will try to bury but cannot erase. It began before the sun had a chance to rise. In the eastern corridor of Burkina Faso, where the land is flat and the mornings are usually calm, a heavily guarded military base was preparing for another routine day. Then, without warning, the stillness was broken by the unmistakable thunder of explosions. The attack was swift, so swift there was no time to mount a defense. In under 15 minutes, the base was overwhelmed. More than 50 Burkinabè soldiers, some of the nation's most disciplined and trusted fighters, were gone. Their bodies lay scattered across the dust. Communications were severed, radios silent. Surveillance drones normally circling high overhead were mysteriously disabled in the first seconds of the assault. Whoever planned it knew exactly how to cut the eyes and ears of the base before striking its heart. By the time reinforcements arrived, the attackers had vanished into the horizon, leaving only smoke and the bitter scent of explosives. The precision, the timing, and the technology used raised immediate questions. This was no random act of insurgency. It was calculated, coordinated, and according to many Burkinabè citizens, politically motivated. And there was one detail no one could ignore: the timing. Just days earlier, a delegation from the United States had landed in Ouagadougou, their mission to formally invite President Ibrahim Traoré to Washington for a prestigious award ceremony. The stated reason was to honor his leadership and development initiatives. But to Traoré, it smelled like a velvet-gloved trap, a way to pull him into the orbit of the very powers he had been resisting since the day he took office. Without hesitation, he declined. There was no room for polite diplomacy, masking deeper intentions. He even refused to meet representatives of a major American-backed organization that arrived shortly after. The message was clear: Burkina Faso's sovereignty was not up for negotiation. And then within days, the soldiers were dead. For the Burkinabè public, the pattern was too sharp to be dismissed as coincidence. In markets, mosques, and meeting halls, the whispers grew louder. This is punishment for refusing to kneel. The government's official investigation is still underway, but the public verdict was reached almost instantly. The West, particularly the United States, was the prime suspect in the eyes of the people. The nation went into mourning. Flags were lowered, schools closed. Streets and government buildings were covered in posters of the 50 fallen soldiers, their names printed in bold letters, their faces staring back with quiet defiance. A national funeral was held, attended by thousands, with President Traoré present not as a distant leader, but as a soldier standing among his own. It was in that moment of grief that the pivot happened. While the rest of the country buried its dead, Traoré began to plan, not in whispers, but in decisive moves that would set the tone for the days ahead. In a section of Ouagadougou known for its industrial warehouses and heavy silence, an old facility once used for equipment repairs was reactivated. The difference was that this time it would not be repairing, it would be creating. Behind guarded gates and thick concrete walls, a new national defense project came to life, the manufacturing of Burkinabe-made drone missiles. Not imported, not donated. Designed, built, and tested by the country's own engineers. Many of these engineers were young graduates from the nation's university, students who once dreamed of careers abroad, now working day and night on machines that could patrol borders, track hostile movements, and strike if necessary. Their mission was simple: ensure that Burkina Faso would never again be caught off guard. The plan was ambitious: 5 drone squadrons, each programmed to respond instantly to any unauthorized military presence within the country's borders. Some drones were already operational, conducting live surveillance over the most vulnerable regions. But the drones were only one part of the response. Within 48 hours of the attack, Russian special forces landed in Burkina Faso. They were not there for ceremonial visits or public displays. They came for joint military readiness. Alongside Burkinabè troops, they launched intense training exercises, border defense, drone warfare, counterterrorism operations. These were not foreign mercenaries sent on contracts dictated from abroad. They were allied instructors working under Traoré's terms, not the other way around. The message was unmistakable: Burkina Faso would choose its own partners and write its own defense strategy. From that moment forward, the country's security apparatus shifted into a higher gear. Military engineers were integrated into frontline planning. Border regions saw an influx of patrol units. Intelligence operations were expanded to anticipate, not just react to external threats. For the people of Burkina Faso, the funeral of 50 soldiers became something more than a day of mourning. It became the spark that lit a national transformation. What began as an unprovoked strike now marked the start of a new era, one where Burkina Faso would no longer rely on foreign charity for its defense, and where retaliation would be measured not just in words, but in the tools and will to act. The day after the funeral, something shifted in the air of Ouagadougou. It wasn't just grief anymore, it was resolve. From the markets to the mosques, from university campuses to remote villages, the same word was whispered, spoken, and shouted: retaliation. But this was not a call for reckless vengeance. It was a call for preparedness, calculated, disciplined, and deeply rooted in the belief that Burkina Faso's dignity would no longer be at the mercy of foreign hands. President Ibrahim Traoré acted with the urgency of a soldier who knows the enemy will strike again. The drone manufacturing facility, already running around the clock, received a direct order: accelerate production. The first operational units were deployed to the eastern and northern borders within weeks. Each drone was equipped with AI-enhanced surveillance, real-time tracking systems, and the capability to neutralize threats before they crossed into Burkinabè territory. Then came Operation Culpilgo. The name spread quickly across the nation, becoming both a military code and a rallying cry. This was more than a military campaign, it was a national defense strategy designed to mobilize every citizen. Traoré's vision was clear: every Burkinabè must be a guardian of the nation. Under Operation Culpilgo, civilians began receiving defense training in community centers, schools, and open fields. Farmers learned how to identify and report suspicious movements in border regions. Students studied not just history, but military strategy so they could understand the stakes of the present. Women's groups organized first aid workshops and supply chains for potential conflict zones. The government began fortifying borders with AI-driven sensor systems and anti-drone defenses, many built locally. And in perhaps the most symbolic move of all, Traoré redirected $300 million funds previously reserved for foreign aid projects into domestic military innovation. For decades, Burkina Faso had been told it needed outside help to survive. Now it was proving that survival could be built from within. The streets reflected this shift. In Kaya, the morning air carried the rhythmic sound of boots marching in unison, soldiers and new recruits training side by side. In the plains of Fada Ngorma, farmers paused their plowing to lift rifles, integrating defense into daily life. In the capital, murals of the 50 fallen soldiers began to appear on public walls, painted in vivid colors with the words, "Their blood protects our future." It wasn't just the military preparing for battle, it was the soul of the nation hardening. Traditional hunters offered their skills in tracking. Blacksmiths returned to forging not just tools, but symbolic blades carried by community defense units. Cultural groups revived war songs, transforming them into daily anthems in markets and gathering places. The unity was palpable. Muslims, Christians, and practitioners of traditional faiths stood side by side in a national day of prayer and sacrifice, asking for divine protection and ancestral guidance. One elder was heard saying, "This is not just a fight for land, it is a fight for the spirit of Africa itself." On the geopolitical front, Traoré moved with equal precision. Within 48 hours of the attack, Russian special forces had landed not for ceremonial diplomacy, but for war readiness. Joint drills with Burkinabè troops became a daily occurrence. Border defense simulations, drone warfare tactics, and counterinsurgency exercises. Russian advisors did not act as commanders. They acted as mentors, transferring knowledge so that Burkina Faso's forces could stand on their own. In private meetings with Mali and Niger, Traoré proposed synchronizing troop rotations, sharing intelligence, and unifying air defense capabilities. Out of these talks emerged a term that would soon make headlines: the Wall of Resistance. It was more than an alliance, it was a declaration that the Sahel would no longer be a soft target for foreign destabilization. Inside the presidential war room, sources revealed that Traoré unveiled what he called the African doctrine of retaliation. It was a three-pillar strategy: total self-reliance in defense, no foreign bases, no begging for military aid. Build what is needed, train who is needed. Strategic disruption, respond to attacks not only militarily, but economically, digitally, and diplomatically. Civic militarization. Every citizen is a soldier in mindset, vigilance, and sacrifice. The doctrine fused advanced drone technology with indigenous warfare tactics, civil resistance, and cyber capabilities. Russian advisors were brought in to help rewrite training manuals, while Burkinabè intelligence officers trained alongside Malian and Russian cyber experts. But perhaps the most powerful weapon Traoré wielded was psychological. For the first time, Burkinabè soldiers saw themselves not as victims of global politics, but as the first line of defense for Africa's sovereignty. Across villages and cities, murals began depicting not only Burkinabè fighters, but also Malian and Nigerian soldiers standing together under a single flag, a flag of red, gold, and black, the colors of unity and struggle. The reaction from the West was swift. Think tanks in Washington published emergency reports warning of escalating instability in the Sahel. Editorials painted Traoré as radical and dangerous, ignoring the fact that his alignment was with his people, not with foreign powers. French media intensified scrutiny, digging for weaknesses in his government, questioning his alliance with Russia, even casting doubt on his age and experience. Through it all, Traoré's message remained steady: Burkina Faso was not for sale. The high point of this wave came when, during a community defense rally in Ouagadougou, Traoré stood before a crowd of thousands, raised his fist, and declared they thought they could scare us into submission. Instead, they have awakened a nation that will never kneel again. The roar of the crowd that followed wasn't just for him, it was for the soldiers, for the farmers, for the mothers and children who understood that this fight was about more than one battle. It was about the future of the continent itself. The shock of losing 50 soldiers could have fractured the nation. Instead, it forged an unprecedented unity between government, military, and civilians. What began as a defensive reaction was quickly transforming into a societal shift, one that touched every village, marketplace, and institution in Burkina Faso. The most immediate impact was budgetary sovereignty. Traoré's decision to redirect $300 million from foreign aid projects into domestic defense sent a clear message: the country's safety would no longer depend on donor conditions. These funds revitalized local industry factories, producing drones, anti-drone systems, and border sensors operated entirely under Burkinabè control. For the first time in decades, military technology was not just purchased, but created within national borders, employing thousands of young engineers and technicians. Civic life was transformed. Community defense units emerged in towns and rural areas, blending traditional knowledge with modern tactics. Elders, hunters, and blacksmiths took on formal roles alongside trained soldiers. Farmers integrated watchtowers into their fields, while teachers introduced lessons on national security and sovereignty into school curricula. The concept of every citizen a guardian was no longer just rhetoric, it was a lived reality. In the cultural sphere, art became a weapon of memory and morale. Musicians wrote ballads that told the stories of the fallen soldiers, played daily on radio stations. Painters turned city walls into open-air galleries of defiance with images of Traore alongside the 50 martyrs. Poets revived ancient war chants now performed at community gatherings, transforming grief into collective strength. Religious leaders united in an extraordinary show of solidarity. Muslim imams, Christian pastors, and traditional priests jointly declared a national day of prayer and fasting, calling for divine protection. Such interfaith cooperation had rarely been seen in the country's history, and it reinforced the idea that this struggle was not political alone, it was spiritual. On the political stage, Traoré's popularity surged. His rejection of Western overtures and decisive post-attack actions resonated with both urban elites and rural farmers. Opposition parties found themselves sidelined, unable to argue against a leader who had visibly strengthened the country's security posture. Parliament passed emergency measures granting the executive greater flexibility in defense spending and border fortification with near-unanimous support. However, the consolidation of national unity came with international costs. Aid from certain Western nations slowed or stopped entirely. Foreign NGOs reported increased scrutiny and some scaled back operations. Yet, for many Burkinabè, these were acceptable sacrifices for the sake of sovereignty. Perhaps the most profound change was psychological. For decades, Burkina Faso had been cast both by outsiders and by its own citizens as small, dependent, and vulnerable. Now it was redefining itself as a cornerstone of Sahelian resistance, capable of defending its land and shaping its destiny without permission from global powers. As one young recruit put it during a community rally, they wanted us to be afraid. Now they will have to live with the fact that we are awake. From Washington to Paris, the shockwaves of Burkina Faso's transformation have been impossible to ignore. What began as a localized tragedy was now redrawing the security and political map of West Africa. In the United States, think tanks and policy circles moved quickly. Reports warned of a dangerous pivot in the Sahel, painting Traoré as a leader steering Burkina Faso toward anti-Western alliances. Editorials in major newspapers shifted tone, no longer describing him as a dynamic young reformer, but as defiant and radical. Cable news segments debated whether his rejection of the Washington Award and expulsion of certain NGOs signaled a permanent break from Western influence. Behind closed doors, diplomatic cables urged outreach to contain the growing ice bloc of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. France, still reeling from its loss of influence in the region, intensified its media coverage. French outlets scrutinized every aspect of Traoré's government, questioning economic data, highlighting any administrative missteps, and speculating about internal dissent. The unspoken goal was clear: undermine his legitimacy before his model of sovereignty inspired other former colonies. Meanwhile, Russia embraced the moment. Kremlin spokespeople openly praised Traoré's courage and commitment to self-reliance, framing the partnership as an example of mutually respectful cooperation in Africa. Russian state media broadcast images of joint military drills, drone production lines, and crowds chanting Traoré's name, casting him as the face of a new African resistance. China adopted a quieter but equally strategic approach. While avoiding public alignment, Chinese diplomats initiated talks on infrastructure and trade, signaling interest in maintaining strong economic ties without overtly challenging the West's narrative. The African Union, however, remained conspicuously silent. No official condemnation of the attack, no solidarity statement. This silence ignited online movements across the continent. Hashtags like AU Where Are You and Africa for Traoré trended for days, accusing the AU of abandoning one of its own. In global terms, the events in Burkina Faso are now viewed as a test case. Can a small African nation armed with domestic ingenuity and selective alliances stand against the combined pressure of military, economic, and media power from the West? For the powers watching, the answer is uncertain. But for millions across Africa and the diaspora, the message is already clear. Burkina Faso is no longer playing defense. It's setting the rules of engagement. The dust has settled on the battlefield, but in Burkina Faso, the war is far from over. The retaliation has already begun, not with reckless aggression, but with the steady build of a nation determined never to be caught off guard again. Drone squadrons hum over the borderlands, community militias train side by side with soldiers, and a new doctrine of self-reliance takes root in every corner of the country. Yet history tells us that moments like this do not go unanswered. The powers that have long profited from Africa's weakness will not simply walk away. Economic levers may be pulled. Information warfare will intensify. Covert operations may seek to destabilize what cannot be defeated openly. And for a small nation standing tall against giants, the road ahead will be as treacherous as it is inspiring. But here is the truth that Burkina Faso has already proven dignity is worth defending even at the highest cost. This is no longer just about one president, one government, or one battle. It is about an idea that African sovereignty is not a privilege granted by foreign powers, but a right defended by its own people. For older generations watching from afar, those who have seen the world promise freedom only to deliver chains, this moment is a reminder. The fight for self-determination never ends. It changes form. It moves from open battlefields to economic negotiations, from political speeches to control of the airwaves. But the stakes remain the same. Who decides the future of Africa, its people or outsiders? The world is watching Burkina Faso, waiting to see if this spark can survive the storms ahead. The question now is not whether Ibrahim Traoré will hold his ground, but whether others will stand beside him when the pressure mounts. So I ask you, do you think President Ibrahim Traoré's doctrine of retaliation is the right path for Africa's sovereignty, or will it bring even greater challenges from the world's most powerful nations? Please share if you feel you are one of the first to support and stand with President Ibrahim Traoré. Subscribe if you believe that the truth is more important than the headlines, because the next chapter in this story will not be written in secret. It will be written in the open by those who choose to rise.